So here we are in late February, and it's an interesting time of year because we're between seasons and you kind of feel the push-pull, the tug. I was thinking about the fact that the midpoint between the winter and the summer solstice is still 3 weeks away. So one would think we're still deep into winter, and a week ago we were. And this week we're not so much. It was actually warm the last couple of days. I had a lovely call from my brother who said he was tapping the sugar maples that my father had planted decades ago. My father would be 110 if he were still alive, and he, as an adult, he planted a tree every year of his life, including some sugar maples. So my brother is tapping those trees, and if you know anything about making maple syrup, the ratios are astonishing. I think it's something like 10 gallons of sap will make a pint of syrup, so it's quite astonishing. And if you're curious about that process, go to Highland County the first couple of weekends in March, because they'll have open house in terms of being able to witness that process. It's interesting. So the natural world is changing really rapidly. If any of you are spending any time outside and walking around looking at anything you've planted last year, bulbs or trees or your shrubs, every day there's some change out there, and it's kind of fun to pick a shrub or a tree or something that's in your daily providence and take note of the changes as they occur. I think all of us are turning toward the light physically and in other ways as well. And I think about this notion of turning toward the light as a way to, sometimes it's a way to ease suffering of all sorts. Because it's easy to get, or I find it's easy to get absorbed by, confused by, it's easy to be distracted by everything that's going on that isn't so wonderful, that's also part of our living. And it varies from a relationship that's gone awry to some change, unwanted change in your health status or that of your beloveds, or the news cycle can all be create this sense of overwhelm or being consumed by negativity at times. I notice sometimes just how my own mind state can be impacted by something I've read, something I've seen. It doesn't take very much at times to notice the change, the tilt, one way or the other. And sometimes it's in a facial expression. You know, we respond. We are social beings, so we notice what's going on around us, and we do respond. And often what's happening is that door of perception, of seeing or hearing or reading or whatever's coming in, there's some story now that's arising, some train of thoughts that we get on that can carry us quite a distance before we realize we're on that train. So the practice here, with all of its beautiful possibilities, reminds us that it's not so much what befalls us or what we're taking in at the moment, but it's the nature of the mind, the body upon which it falls. And so we want to know about the nature of mind. What's true about the nature of mind? What's true about the nature of everything? And some of us came in to an understanding of this phrase recently, wandering into the center of the circle of wonder. Wandering into the center of the circle of wonder. And the Buddha makes it really clear in this tradition that each of us is to inquire, is to be curious. Be curious about our experience to discern what is true. These are some words from the Buddha. It's possible to develop the wholesome. If it were not possible to develop the wholesome, I would not tell you to do so. But because it is possible, therefore I tell you, develop the wholesome. And he says, come and see for yourself. Do not place blind trust in impressive personalities or venerated gurus, but examine the issue for yourselves. When you know for yourselves that something is unwholesome and harmful, then you should reject it. And when you know for yourselves that something is wholesome and beneficial, then you should accept it and put it into practice. And for me, I find there's something really generous in that. There's something affirming and open-hearted in this implication that we ourselves have that capacity to know, that we can intuit for ourselves when something is wholesome or not. And isn't that the reason we practice, to increase that capacity to see, to know what's wholesome, what's non-harming? Maybe this phrase is helpful. Utterly awake, sense doors wide open. Utterly open, non-fixating awareness. So just want to offer a few thoughts tonight on a couple of ideas. One is on this idea of taking refuge. And one would be a couple of ways of practicing, different ways to practice in terms of wandering into the center of the circle of wonder. And all of these are intertwined. So although we can name them in a kind of a linear fashion, they're really interacting, intertwined, happening simultaneously, and permeating each other. So we'll start with taking refuge, and each of you probably has a strategy or a memory perhaps, or a mantra, images or words that serve your well-being, which is really just another validation of your wisdom, of what you know, what you've chosen. Sometimes in this tradition, we speak of taking refuge in what's called the triple gem, or the three jewels, because they remind us of what we sometimes can tend to forget in the heat or in the dark of any moment. The first jewel being the Buddha, the refuge of remembering both the historical Buddha, but also our true nature, the natural goodness, the compassion within, the innate radiance of each of us. And the second jewel, the Dharma or the teachings, is that one where we investigate, we're curious, we ask, what's true? We discover from our experience, looking at our experience, that there are cycles, there's change, there's impermanence, there's aging, there's growth and separation, and we see how transient even our identities are. In other words, if you were to look back 10 years ago, 20 years ago at who you were then, what you believed, what you thought, how you were, to recognize that there is change. There is change. Hopefully for the better, that we are practicing and we are seeing and we are moving in that direction. We note the impermanence as the flow of form, a kind of ongoing changing kaleidoscope of phenomena. And we also see that which does not change, the stillness, kind of like the space where dust motes float through, but the stillness simply is. And the third jewel of the triple gem, or the triple gem, is the Sangha, which is what's right here. The people in front of you, the people behind you, the people beside you, and all of you online. That is community, the collection of folks who are here practicing for the same purposes, the same intentions, to awaken, to support and be supported by the awakening of all of us. And whether that's true here, and it's also true on retreat, or if you sit with a mindfulness group, that Sangha, that community that supports, is a wonderful adjunct to our practice, a refuge. So the taking refuge in these three, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, helps to safeguard us from the dangers of a kind of a pervasive negative response of anxiety or frustration or despair that we sometimes feel. And this is a poem from a poet who writes about the value of protecting so that the heart can float. Here's what she has to say. I think of the bones of the unsung rib cage, the way they protect the heart. How bone too is living, how it constantly renews and remakes itself. I think of how ribs engage with other ribs to expand, to contract. And because they do their solid work, they allow the heart to float. This is what I want to do, to be a rib in this body, to make a safe space for love. I want to be that flexible, that committed to what's vital. Protection so that the heart can float. We take refuge in our own goodness, in what's true, and in community. And then 3 practices of intention that are intimately connected with those taking refuge in those 3, actually braided together. Again, I'm imagining the filaments that we know exist beneath the ground, right? The trees, the ways in which we know now how they talk to each other. All of this is interwoven. So the three practices are developing tranquility, or sense of calm, abiding awareness, gaining insight into what's true, really developing wisdom, and threading it all with compassion and kindness. So again, that first practice to develop tranquility of the mind, it's really to remember that it's not so much what befalls us, but the nature of the mind that it falls upon. Pema Chodron says the main thing about practice is that you're the only one who knows what's opening and what's closing down. You're the only one who knows when you're opening and when you're closing down. So you know when you're using things to protect yourself, to keep your ego together, and when you're opening and letting things fall apart, letting the world come as it is, working with it rather than struggling against it. And this is not to say that there aren't times when we do need to keep things protected and intact, and to recognize that there is also a place for when things fall apart, which is the title of one of her books, When Things Fall Apart. So sometimes that's an invitation. Can we be curious enough to actually step back and to actually see what's the lens of this perceiving? How are we perceiving the world? Through what layers are we seeing? So that involves really being cognizant of what's arising in this mind. Thoughts, feelings, states, sensations in the body, which are informative. You might consider the causes and conditions for the creation of your own lens, and that would include things like your family of origin, your ancestors, where you grew up, the community around you back then and now, your health, your history, personally, locally, nationally. Every one of those is a cause or a condition that has an impact on how we respond. And now, if you imagine that that same set of causes and conditions exists for every being on the planet, the family of origin, education, ethnicity, birth order. There's an astonishing array of causes and conditions about which we often know so little, even about our own at times. And yet we are ready to assess, dissect, and often pass judgment, aren't we, on ourselves, on others, on what's based on what we've perceived through our own limited lens. So likely you've heard this poem before. I've used it several times, and I think others have as well, but it bears repeating. Have compassion for everyone you meet, even if they don't want it. What seems conceit, bad manners, or cynicism is always a sign of things no ears have heard, no eyes have seen. You do not know what wars are going on down there where the spirit meets the bone. And a short poem from an 18th century Japanese poet who speaks to the universality of this being human. He says, under cherry trees, there are no strangers. And I'm reminded of a couple of years ago, we were in Washington, D.C. during the cherry blossom blooming time, late March, early April, and how there was a shared sense of community as we were all there with the same intention of just basking in the beauty of these incredible trees. So we remember what we know, the truth of what it means to be human. And then wisdom might look something like this. For one who is established in their true nature, thoughts and feelings add nothing to their self, nor remove anything from it. And thus they, the thoughts and feelings, begin to quieten down. Everything simply is as it is. Everything simply is as it is. Maybe there's a certain recognition of calm or tranquility with that. Everything simply is as it is. Coming to this place of accepting ourselves and others, we can recognize some agency perhaps to choose. We can challenge what needs to be challenged out of care rather than hatred or mindless reaction or mindless self-righteous judgment. Someone has said, we're not responsible for our first thought, only the second. So we have these reactions, we have these, we're not responsible for that. They're just going to arise. That is the nature of this being human. But we can take some responsibility for the next thought. And one of the questions we might ask ourselves at that point is, what view is onward leading? What choice can we make in that moment that allows us to inhabit awareness, calming the mind, body, moving towards investigation with curiosity? What's this? It's a little bit like turning on a light in a dark corner, shining the light of awareness on what's here. And it's all done with this strong rib cage and a floating heart. So I'll close with a poem from Wendell Berry. Despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be. I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in its beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Thank you for listening, for your presence, and for your practice.